She had been crying alone in the dark for 20 minutes, pressing both hands over her mouth so no one would hear. She thought she was invisible. She thought no one cared. But the most dangerous man in Chicago had been listening through the wall the entire time. And when he finally opened that door, nothing in either of their lives would ever be the same again. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or silently falling apart while the world kept moving, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been coming down since late afternoon, the kind of rain that didn't announce itself with thunder or wind, but simply arrived and stayed, steady and indifferent, sheeting against the glass exterior of the Caldwell Tower like it had nowhere else to be. 41 floors above the wet streets of downtown Chicago, the headquarters of Moretti Holdings occupied the entire top floor, and from the outside, all clean lines and cold light, it looked exactly like what Roman Moretti wanted the world to see. Order, control, legitimacy. Inside, it was something else entirely. Evelyn Hart knew the difference between the public face of this place and its actual bones. She had learned it over 9 months of arriving before anyone else and leaving after the last light went dark. She knew which conference rooms had been soundproofed and why. She knew which client meetings required her to destroy her own notes afterward. She knew that the man whose calendar she managed, whose correspondence she filtered, whose entire professional life flowed through her hands. She knew that Roman Moretti was not a businessman who had made unfortunate acquaintances. He was the acquaintance. Everything else was cover. She had told herself in the beginning that it didn't matter, that she needed the money badly enough that the particulars of where it came from were a problem she could live with. Her mother's medical debt had been swallowing them for 3 years. Her brother Danny had dropped out of his second semester of community college because she couldn't cover both tuition and the minimum payments on the hospital bills. She had taken the job at Moretti Holdings because it paid nearly 3 times what she'd been making at the insurance firm downtown, and because the recruiter had assured her, with a straight face and careful language, that it was a legitimate executive assistant position with full benefits and annual performance reviews. Both of those things were technically true. Neither of them was the whole story. But Evelyn had been very good for 9 months at not requiring the whole story. She came in, she worked. She was precise and quiet and utterly reliable. She never asked questions she wasn't supposed to ask. She never lingered in hallways when voices dropped. She understood, without anyone saying it directly, that the value she provided was not just competence, it was discretion, the ability to be present and useful and completely, functionally invisible. She was good at invisible. She had been practicing it most of her life. It was a Wednesday evening in November when everything came apart. She had been the last one on the floor, which was not unusual. The associate staff had cleared out by 7. Roman had left at 8:30 for what his calendar listed as a private dinner, which she knew from tone and context meant something that involved men who did not shake hands until they had established who had more to lose. She had stayed behind to finish the quarterly correspondence files, a task that required no one's supervision and that she preferred to do in the particular silence of an emptied office. She was 3/4 done when her phone buzzed. The number was one she didn't recognize. Chicago area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had learned, working here, to be careful about unknown numbers. But something made her pick up. Some low animal frequency she couldn't name. "Is this Evelyn Hart?" It was not a question. The voice on the other end was flat and accented and did not carry a single note of warmth. "Who is this?" she said. "That's not important right now. What's important is that your brother Daniel is sitting across from me at a table in a room you don't know the address of. And whether he stays comfortable or gets very uncomfortable depends entirely on the next 5 minutes of this conversation." The file she had been holding dropped from her hand. She heard it hit the carpet, and she did not look down. "Put him on," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. She didn't know where that came from. There was a pause, a shuffle. Then Danny's voice, young and trying hard not to sound scared and failing completely. "Ev, hey, I'm okay, I just—" The line cut back to the flat voice. $60,000, the man said. "That's what your brother owes. With interest, it's 64. You have 72 hours. If we don't have the money, we start charging in other ways. Do you understand what I mean by other ways?" She understood. "I need to speak with my brother again." The line went dead. Evelyn stood in the middle of Roman Moretti's executive suite for a long moment. The rain hit the window. The city below glittered and moved, indifferent. Her hands were shaking. She noticed them from a distance, the way you notice weather through glass. She walked to the far end of the floor, away from the main suite, away from the workstations and the conference room and the executive corridor. She found the supply room, the one nobody used anymore since facilities had moved the storage downstairs. And she went inside and pulled the door shut behind her and sat down on the floor between two shelving units and pressed her back against the wall. And then she fell apart. It wasn't pretty. Crying rarely is when it's real. It came out in chunks, ugly and broken, and she shoved her knuckles against her mouth so hard it hurt because the walls in this place were not as thick as they looked, and she was not going to do this where anyone could hear it. She was not going to be the woman who broke down in the office. She was not going to be anyone's problem. She had been so careful, for so long, about not being anyone's problem. The $64,000 was an abstraction. She knew, even through the panic, that it was meant to stay one, that a number that large, delivered with a 72-hour deadline, was not an invitation to negotiate. It was a mechanism. The debt was real. Danny had told her about it 3 months ago, in pieces, the way he always told her bad things, slowly, reluctantly, with long gaps where he watched her face to gauge how angry she was getting. He had borrowed money from people he shouldn't have borrowed from, to cover losses from gambling he shouldn't have been doing, and the debt had grown the way those debts always grew, and he had been telling himself he would handle it before it got bad enough to involve her. He had not handled it. She had been furious. She had said things she meant, and some things she didn't mean, and Danny had looked at the floor the whole time, and afterward they had arrived at a kind of uneasy truce where she would help him figure out a plan if he quit and stayed quit and let her manage it. She had started calling around, looking at options. There were no good options, but there were some that were less catastrophic than others, and she had been working through them methodically. She had not been working fast enough. She didn't hear the door open. She was too far inside it by then. The crying had taken on its own momentum, the kind that stops consulting you about when it's appropriate. And the first thing she registered was light from the hallway cutting across the floor, and then the door closing again, and then silence. She scrubbed her face with both hands and looked up. Roman Moretti stood in the narrow space between the door and the first shelf, still in his overcoat, which meant he had just come back. He was watching her, not with the expression she would have predicted, not impatience or irritation or the faintly contemptuous efficiency he turned on problems that had appeared without his permission. He was watching her with something she couldn't immediately name because she had never seen it on his face before. He was 40 years old and built like a man who had spent his 20s doing things that required it. Dark hair, going gray at the temples in the past year. Steel blue eyes that she had learned over 9 months functioned as a precision instrument. They measured things constantly, calculated distances and intentions and weak points. They were not soft eyes. She had never once thought of them as soft. Right now, they looked almost careful. He did not say anything immediately, which was not like him. Roman Moretti was not a man who left silences unfilled unless the silence itself was the communication. He looked at her, at the evidence of whatever he had walked in on, and he leaned his shoulder against the wall and he waited. She wiped her face again. "I apologize," she said. "I'll be out of here in a minute." "I didn't ask you to leave." "I know, I'm telling you I will. Evelyn." He said her name the way he said very few things, without inflection, without any performance of authority, just the word placed in the room like a stone. "Who made you cry?" It was not a question, not exactly. It landed somewhere between a question and a fact he had already decided to locate. She looked at the floor. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed slightly. She had not noticed that before. "It's a personal matter. It won't affect my work." "I didn't ask if it would affect your work." Mr. Moretti? Roman. He had told her that before. She had not used it. "Tell me." She didn't know afterward exactly why she did. Maybe it was the crying, the way that much emotion stripped away the usual architecture of professional distance and left you standing in the rubble of it without anything to hide behind. Maybe it was simply that he had asked in a way that didn't leave room for a polished deflection, and she was too hollowed out to construct one. Maybe, on some level she wasn't going to examine, she had simply been waiting a very long time for someone to ask. She told him. Not all of it. Not the full history with Danny and the debts and the months of trying to solve it quietly. Just the phone call. The voice. The $64,000 in 72 hours. And the thing the man had said about other ways. Roman listened without moving. He did not interrupt. His face went through something while she talked. She watched it happen. The careful expression tightening into something that wasn't quite cold and wasn't quite hot. Something that ran deeper than either. By the time she finished, his jaw was set and his eyes had changed the way eyes change when a decision has already been made and the body is just catching up to it. "What syndicate?" he said. "I don't know. The number was blocked. The accent was..." She thought about it. "Eastern European, maybe. I'm not sure." "Did he give a name? Any name?" "No." Roman was quiet for a moment. In the hallway beyond the supply room, the building settled in the way old steel frames settle in weather. The rain was still audible against the windows even here, muffled and persistent. "How long have you known about your brother's debt?" he asked. 3 months. "And you were handling it?" It wasn't an accusation. She answered it anyway. "I was trying to." He looked at her for a long moment with that unreadable precision in his eyes. Then he straightened off the wall. "Go home tonight. Take nothing from your apartment except what you need for a week. There's a car waiting downstairs. Tell the driver I sent you, and he'll take you to the lakeshore property. You know which one." She did. It was listed in the asset portfolio she managed. A penthouse condominium on the 40th floor of a building 2 miles north. "Mr. Moretti, I can't..." "Roman, I don't need to be relocated. I need $64,000 and a plan. I'll handle the plan." He said it the way someone might say the sky is blue. Not as an argument, just a correction of the relevant facts. "Your brother's location. Do you know the part of the city he was in when he was taken?" She hadn't thought to ask. She hadn't had time to think at all. "He lives in Pilsen. He was probably..." "That's enough. Go downstairs. The driver's name is Callow. Tell him what I said." He moved toward the door, and then he stopped. He didn't turn around, and when he spoke, his voice was level in a way that carried more weight than raised would have. "Whoever called you tonight made a very specific choice. I want you to understand that." She watched his back, his hand resting on the door handle. "What do you mean?" He turned then, just enough to look at her over his shoulder. The expression on his face was not quite anger and not quite something else. It was both things at once, layered in a way she would not fully understand until later. "I mean that calling this number tonight to this phone in this building, that wasn't a coincidence. They knew where you worked. They knew your name and your brother's name and your number. They didn't find your brother by accident." He paused. "Someone sent them to you." He left before she could answer. The door swung shut, and she was alone in the buzzing fluorescent light, and the sound of rain and the echo of what he had just said, and she sat there for a long time before she could make herself stand up. The car was where he said it would be. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with an unhurried way of moving, confirmed his name was Callow without blinking at her request. He opened the rear door and waited while she got in and said nothing during the 40-minute drive through rain-slick streets. She watched the city pass. Pilsen, Bridgeport, the viaducts and the elevated rail and the amber smear of streetlights on wet pavement. Danny was somewhere in this city right now. In a room she didn't know, sitting across from a man with a flat voice and a phone he had already put back in his pocket. She had told herself for 9 months that Roman Moretti's world was not her concern, that she was adjacent to it, not inside it, that the line she had drawn, do the work, ask no questions, take the money, go home, was a line that meant something. Callow pulled into the underground parking of the Lakeshore building. He walked her to the elevator without being asked and keyed a floor. The penthouse had been vacant for the past 4 months. She knew that from the asset calendar. But when the doors opened, the lights were already on. Not all of them. Just enough. Someone had prepared this. Someone had anticipated it. She walked through the apartment in the particular silence of a place that belongs to power. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Lake Michigan spreading out beyond the glass in the dark, the rain hammering its surface into 1,000 tiny craters. She put her bag down on the kitchen counter and stood at the window for a long time, looking at nothing. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Her stomach went cold. She answered immediately. Evelyn. Not the flat voice this time. This voice was warmer and worse. "I heard you had an interesting evening. I want to be clear about something. The gentleman who called you earlier, he works for me. The debt is real. The 72 hours are real, but you should know that the debt itself was created. Your brother was directed toward the men he borrowed from. He was chosen. Who are you? She said. Someone who has been watching your employer for a long time. Someone who understands his weaknesses better than he does. A pause, a smile she could hear without seeing. You're staying at the Lakeshore property tonight. Roman moves fast when he's motivated. That tells me something interesting. She turned away from the window. The apartment suddenly felt very exposed. All that glass, all that light against the dark outside. What do you want? That's between me and Roman. You're just the message. Another pause. Sleep well, Miss Hart. Tomorrow gets complicated. The line went dead again. She stood in the kitchen of Roman Moretti's empty penthouse on the 40th floor, with Lake Michigan behind her and the rain coming down, and she understood, with the cold clarity that sometimes arrives after the shock has burned through, that she was not adjacent to anything anymore. She was in the middle of it, and someone had put her there on purpose. It was past midnight when she heard the elevator. She had not slept. She had not tried to. She had sat at the kitchen counter with a glass of water she hadn't touched and gone through the phone call in her head, word by word, the way she processed complex documents, methodically, stripping out everything that was performance and looking for what was underneath. By the time Roman walked through the door, she had arrived at 3 things she was fairly certain of and several more she needed to ask him directly. He had changed out of his overcoat. Dark shirt, collar open, sleeves rolled to the forearms. He looked the same way she had seen him look after long nights of the particular kind of business that left no paper trail. Not tired exactly, but inhabited differently, like a room after a storm has passed through it. He looked at her and at the untouched glass of water. You should sleep. 2 people have called me tonight from blocked numbers, she said. The first one wanted $64,000. The second one told me the debt was manufactured, that Danny was chosen. She watched his face. You already knew that part. He came around the kitchen island. He didn't sit. He stood across from her with his hands flat on the counter and looked at her in that measuring way. I had a theory, he said. My people confirmed it in the last 3 hours. Who is he? His name is Viktor Dragunov. He runs an operation out of the near north side, has for about 4 years. He's been pushing into territory that isn't his, and I've been letting him run out his own rope. Something moved through Roman's expression. I should have shortened the rope sooner. He said, I'm just the message. You're not just anything. Roman said it with a flat certainty that wasn't meant as a reassurance. He said it the way he said all factual corrections, without room for argument. He targeted you because he knew it would reach me faster than anything else. She looked at him. 9 months of watching this man from a careful professional distance, and she had never once let herself look at him the way she was looking at him right now. Direct, unguarded, asking the question she had been deciding whether to ask since she walked out of the supply room. Why would reaching you through me be faster than anything else? The rain against the windows, the light over the kitchen island, Roman's hands flat on the counter, the old scar across the left one she had noticed on her first day and never asked about. He held her gaze for a long moment. There was something in his face she had never seen there. Not the calculation, not the authority. Something that existed underneath those, something older. Because Dragunov is good at reading people, he said, and he's been reading me for a while. It wasn't the full answer. They both knew it wasn't the full answer. She let it sit, for now. She was a woman who understood that some information arrived in its own time, and pushing only made it retreat. She picked up the water glass and finally drank. My brother, she said, my people are working on location tonight. Dragunov doesn't own enough of the city to keep a hostage completely off the grid. There are limits to what he controls. We'll know more by morning. He straightened. You'll stay here, not as a prisoner. If you need to leave for any reason, Callow takes you and brings you back. You don't go anywhere without him. You can't just... Evelyn, he waited. Your brother is alive because Dragunov needs him that way for now. That's a window. It doesn't stay open. Please don't argue with me about logistics when I'm trying to keep your family together. She wanted to argue. Every instinct she had about autonomy and self-sufficiency and not needing anyone's protection rose up hard and reflexive. But the window. He was right about the window. Danny was alive because he was useful, and useful had an expiration date that she had no way of seeing. She sat with that. Okay, she said finally. But you tell me everything your people find, not a summary. Everything. He looked at her. Something shifted in the stillness of his face. All right. And I want to be part of the conversation about what happens next. I'm not furniture in this. I never thought you were. He said it quietly, almost carefully. I've never once thought you were furniture. He went to the other end of the apartment. She stayed at the counter. The rain kept coming down, and Danny was somewhere in the dark city. And she thought about the voice that had said, "You're just the message." And she thought about the way Roman had said, "You're not just anything." And she did not sleep that night. But she felt, in some hard, unexamined place, less alone than she had in a very long time. She did not examine that. Not yet. By 3 in the morning, 2 things happened almost simultaneously. The first, one of Roman's men, a compact, watchful man named Sarah, who had appeared at the penthouse without introduction and whom Roman clearly trusted entirely, came through the door with information. The hostage location had been narrowed to a 2-block radius in an industrial pocket of the south side. 2 buildings. One of them had power usage consistent with multiple occupants. They needed daylight and closer eyes before they moved. The second, Evelyn's phone buzzed again. This time it was not a blocked number. It was a number she recognized, one she had seen in Roman's files, associated with a name she had filed away 9 months ago and never expected to actually need. She stared at the screen, then she looked up at Roman, who had been talking quietly with Sarah across the room. "Marcus Vane just texted me," she said. The room went very still. Sarah stopped moving. Roman turned to look at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not shock exactly, but something close to it, something fighting through the discipline of a face that had been trained for decades not to show that particular thing. "Say that again," Roman said. She held the phone out so he could see the screen. The message was 4 words. "Don't trust him, run." Roman looked at the message. He looked at Evelyn. In the window behind her, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the first gray hint of dawn was beginning to bleed into the eastern sky over the lake. His jaw worked once. His eyes had gone to a place she couldn't follow. "Marcus Vane," she said quietly, "is the name in your inner circle files as your most trusted lieutenant. He's been with you for 11 years. She watched his face. "So either he's warning me against you, or someone is using his number." She waited. "Which is it?" Roman said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was very controlled in a way that meant the opposite of calm. "Show me the number," he said. "The exact number." She did. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he took a slow breath and said something to Sarah in Italian that she didn't catch, and Sarah left the room immediately, moving with the particular efficiency of a man who has been given an urgent task he fully intends to complete. Roman looked at her. His face had closed again, the calculation back, the authority back, the careful performance of control that she had watched every day for 9 months. But underneath it, just briefly, she had seen the thing that was underneath, the crack in the stone. "Stay here," he said. "Lock the elevator after I leave. Don't open it for anyone except Callow." "Roman, I'll be back in 2 hours." He was already moving toward the elevator. "Don't answer that number again." "You haven't answered my question," she said. He stopped with his back to her, his hand on the elevator panel. He didn't turn around this time. "I don't know," he said. And the weight in those 3 words, the sheer unguarded cost of admitting them, told her more about the night they were in the middle of than anything else he had said. The elevator doors closed. She was alone again with the gray dawn and the lake, and the 4 words on her phone screen, and the terrible understanding that Roman Moretti, the most powerful man in Chicago, the man whose name made other dangerous men careful, had just been handed a betrayal he hadn't seen coming. And they were only at the beginning. The elevator doors had been closed for 4 minutes before Evelyn moved. She counted. It was something she did when her body needed her brain to stay busy. Counted seconds, counted steps, counted the number of times the rain hit the window in a given breath. It was a habit from childhood, from a small apartment where her mother's moods had been unpredictable, and knowing how long a silence lasted had felt like a kind of survival skill. 4 minutes, 240 seconds, long enough for Roman to reach the lobby. Long enough for whoever was waiting in the dark outside to know he was moving. She locked the elevator the way he told her to. Then she stood in the kitchen with her phone in her hand and looked at the 4 words again. Don't trust him. Run. The number was Marcus Vane's. She knew it was because she had entered it herself 8 months ago into the emergency contact protocol that Roman had made her memorize on her 3rd week. 3 numbers, in order. Callow first, then a man named Petrov who handled security, then Marcus. She had typed all 3 into her personal phone and cross-referenced them against the internal directory, and they had matched. This number matched, which meant either Marcus Vane had sent this message himself from his own phone at 3 in the morning, or someone had Marcus Vane's phone. She set hers face down on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the cold stone and breathed. The apartment was very quiet. She could hear the ventilation system, a low and constant sound like distant traffic. Through the windows, the lake was a flat gray nothing, and the dawn was coming up reluctant and colorless, the kind of morning that doesn't arrive so much as simply replace the dark. She was still standing there when the elevator chimed. She spun. Her hand found the block of kitchen knives on the counter before she had consciously decided to reach for it, fingers wrapping around the handle of the largest one, a reflex she didn't know she had. She had grown up in a neighborhood where that reflex made sense. She had spent 9 months trying to pretend she hadn't. The doors opened and Callow stepped out. He looked at the knife in her hand with no expression at all, the way a man looks at weather. Mr. Moretti sent me to stay with you, he said. He said to tell you Sarah confirmed the number was cloned. Someone is running Marcus Vane's line. She set the knife down slowly. Her hands were steadier than they should have been. Is Marcus alive? We don't know yet. Callow came fully into the apartment and positioned himself with his back to the wall beside the elevator, a posture that managed to be both relaxed and completely alert. Mr. Moretti will call when he knows. Where did he go? Miss Hart. I know. She turned back to the window. You're not going to tell me. I'm going to make coffee, Callow said. You should eat something. There's food in the refrigerator. Someone stocked it this week. She looked at him. Someone stocked it this week, she repeated. This apartment has been listed as vacant for 4 months. Callow said nothing. He moved to the coffee maker with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything. She turned back to the window and thought about that. Roman's phone call came at 6:47. She had eaten half a piece of toast and drunk most of a cup of coffee and changed into clothes from the overnight bag she had packed the night before with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has learned not to fall apart until the immediate task is complete. She had also gone through everything she could remember about Marcus Vane from 9 months of proximity. The files she had handled, the meetings she had logged, the way Roman talked about him and to him. 11 years together. That was a long time in any business. Longer, exponentially, in this one. Marcus is safe. Roman's voice on the phone was level, but carrying something compressed and hard underneath the level. His phone was taken 3 days ago. He reported it, to me directly. And I logged it and forgot it because we were in the middle of the Bridgeport situation and it seemed minor. A pause. It wasn't minor. Someone cloned the line and sat on it, Evelyn said, waiting for a moment when a message from Marcus would do the most damage. Yes. Which means they've been inside your operation long enough to know that a warning from Marcus specifically would land differently than a warning from anyone else. She kept her voice even. That's not a guess, Roman. That's someone who has been watching your inner circle. The silence on his end was brief and total. I know. How many people knew I was being moved to this apartment last night? Another pause. Callow, Sarah, Marcus. Marcus's phone was compromised 3 days ago. I know, he said again, and this time there was something in it that was not quite anger and not quite something worse. Something a man produces when he realizes the error was his own, and the cost of it belongs to someone else. The second call I received last night, Evelyn said. The one from the warm voice. He knew I was at the Lakeshore property. He said it directly. He knew within an hour of my arrival. Roman said nothing. He's been inside, she said, not just watching from outside. Someone in your circle has been feeding information to Dragunov for long enough that he knew exactly how to construct this. The debt, Danny, the timing, the message from Marcus's number, all of it was engineered. She paused. You have a leak. The line was quiet long enough that she checked to see if the call had dropped. Come to the Caldwell office, Roman said finally. Not the main floor, the basement conference room. Callow knows it. 1 hour. He hung up. She looked at Callow, who had heard her half of the conversation. He was already picking up his jacket from the back of the kitchen chair. Whenever you're ready, he said. The basement conference room was not on any floor plan she had ever seen, which meant it was not on any floor plan that existed on paper. Callow brought her down through a service entrance and a corridor that smelled like concrete and old electrical cable, and through a door that required a keypad in his palm. The room beyond was low-ceilinged and functional. A long table, 8 chairs, a bank of monitors on one wall currently showing feeds from cameras she didn't recognize the locations of. 3 men were already there when she arrived. Roman stood at the head of the table. Beside him, a man she recognized from peripheral glimpses over 9 months. Thick-necked, mid-40s, moving the way former military men move, with the weight in their heels. This was Petrov. The third man she didn't know, younger, sharp-featured, with restless hands and the kind of dark circles that came from 2 or 3 nights of no sleep. Marcus Vane was not there. Roman looked at Evelyn when she came in. He was in different clothes than last night. He'd been home, or somewhere, and he looked like he had slept for approximately 90 minutes and decided that was sufficient. He didn't look broken. He looked like a man who had already processed the betrayal and moved to the next required task, and she didn't know whether to find that impressive or frightening. Sit, he said. She sat. Callow took a position by the door. Roman looked at the 3 men and then at her and said, Dragunov's play is more sophisticated than I gave him credit for. That's my error, and I'm done making it. He placed a photograph on the table, printed, not digital, which told her something about the kind of care he was taking. This is the building we believe Danny Hart is being held in, south side near the rail yards. Our surveillance established activity consistent with 4 to 6 occupants as of 2 hours ago. Evelyn looked at the photograph. A squat industrial building, brick, no windows on the ground floor. Nothing distinguishable from the outside. We go in tonight, Petrov said. He had a voice like gravel in a bucket and apparently felt no need to add anything to that. We go in when we know the interior layout, Roman said. Not before. He looked at the younger man with the restless hands. Gallo. The young man opened a laptop. We pulled utility records going back 6 months. The building was sold in a private transaction in August. The registered owner is a shell that connects to 2 other shells before it goes dark. That's Dragunov's signature. He's been using it as a secondary location for at least 3 months. A map appeared on the monitors. 2 exits that we can confirm, possibly a third through the eastern loading dock, but we can't verify without eyes inside. Then get eyes inside, Petrov said. We have 4 hours before Dragunov's people rotate the watch on that building, Gallo said. If we're going to place someone, I can do it. Everyone looked at Evelyn. She had not planned to say it. It had arrived, fully formed, from the same place the knife reflex had come from. Some part of her that had been quietly calculating while the rest of her ran on adrenaline. He doesn't know my face. I'm not in your operation. I'm not a known quantity to his people. I'm a woman looking for a lost cat or asking for directions, or I'm lost. Whatever. I can get close enough to confirm the exits and tell you what the approach looks like. The silence in the room was the particular kind that arrives when a group of men are trying to find a polite way to say no to something they can't actually argue against. No, Roman said, not politely. Which part is wrong? She looked at him directly. Tell me which part of the logic is wrong. You're not trained for... I'm not going in. I'm walking past a building and looking at it. Women do that. It's not remarkable. She held his gaze. Danny has been in that building since at least last night. Every hour we wait is an hour Dragunov's patience could run out. You said it yourself. The window doesn't stay open. I said that, Roman said, with the controlled tension of a man who regrets having made a reasonable point that is now being used against him. Then don't waste it arguing about this. Petrov made a sound that might have been approval or might have been digestive. Roman looked at Evelyn for a long moment. She did not look away. She had spent 9 months looking away, making herself smaller, taking up less space, being careful not to require anything from anyone. She was done with that particular economy. You walk the block, he said finally. Once. You don't stop. You don't look directly at the building. You wear the earpiece, and Gallo talks you through what we need. He pointed at her. You come back. Agreed. I'm serious, Evelyn. So am I. He held her gaze one more second. Something moved through his face, not quite the thing she had seen in the storage room, but related to it. A recognition. Then he looked at Gallo and said, Set it up. It took 40 minutes to prepare. The earpiece was small enough that her hair covered it completely. Gallo walked her through what to observe, the position of any lookouts, the sight lines from the loading dock, the number of vehicles in the adjacent lot, whether the ground floor windows were boarded from inside or outside. Detail that required only eyes and a calm walk, and the ability to hold the information without visibly reacting to it. Gallo drove her to within 3 blocks. She walked the rest in flat shoes and a dark jacket, and the particular inner stillness she had developed over years of working in rooms where she was not supposed to be noticed. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, a few men moving around the rail yard in the middle distance, a delivery truck idling at a loading bay 2 blocks east. The air smelled like diesel and wet concrete, and the particular cold that comes off Chicago in November like a personal affront. She turned onto the block. The building was exactly what the photograph had shown it to be, squat and brick and withholding. She didn't look at it directly. She looked at the sidewalk ahead of her and used her peripheral vision the way Gallo had told her to, counting and noting without turning her head. One man near the north corner, smoking, facing east. The loading dock entrance, large enough for a vehicle, currently closed with a roll-down door that sat unevenly in its track, which meant it had been opened recently. A van parked in the adjacent lot, positioned to face the building's south side. Van in the lot, she said quietly. Almost no movement in her lips. South-facing. It's warm, hon. I can see exhaust from the tailpipe. Copy, Gallo said in her ear. Someone in it. Can't tell. Windows are dark. She kept walking. The man at the north corner finished his cigarette and dropped it without looking at her. Lookout at north corner just stood down. He's going inside. Rotation, Gallo said. Earlier than expected. Move. She moved. She didn't run. Running was the thing that got you noticed, that transformed you from a woman on a sidewalk into something that warranted attention. She walked with purpose and turned the corner and kept walking until she was 2 blocks north, and then she stopped beside a shuttered storefront and breathed. Good, Gallo said. Come back. She looked at the storefront's dark window. Her reflection looked back at her, pale, controlled, the dark circles of someone who hadn't slept. She looked like a woman who had walked past a building that contained her brother and kept walking because that was what the situation required. She hated that she had gotten this good at what the situation required. Gallo collected her at the corner. She gave Gallo everything on the drive back. By the time they reached the basement conference room, a plan was taking shape. Roman and Petrov working with the focused velocity of men for whom this kind of problem was a practice language. She sat at the table and watched Roman work, and let herself feel, just briefly, the thing she had been refusing to feel, the simple animal relief of not being alone in this. Then her phone buzzed on the table. Not a call. A text. Unknown number, Sam. Not the blocked line from last night. A different one. She turned the phone over. A photograph. Danny. Sitting on a concrete floor, wrists zip-tied. He was looking directly at the camera with the expression she knew from 23 years of watching her brother try not to scare her. The particular composure that cost him everything to maintain. There was blood at his hairline. Not much. Enough. Beneath the photograph, a message. Tell Moretti to come alone to 47 Canal Side at midnight. No soldiers. No earpieces. If I see a second car, your brother stops being useful. V. She put the phone on the table so Roman could see the screen. She did it without a word because there were no words that improved on what the image already said. Roman looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time with his hands very still on the table, and the thing in his face she was starting to understand. That compressed and dangerous quality that was not anger, because anger was too simple and too hot for what it actually was. He picked up the phone. He looked at the message. He set it down. He's moving the timeline, Petrov said. He's moving the meeting, Roman said. The building on the south side is a decoy, or it will be by midnight. He's been watching us. He knows we found it. His jaw was set hard. He wants to control the location. You can't go alone, Petrov said. I know that. Then, I know. Roman looked at Evelyn. His eyes held that layered, complicated quality she had first noticed in the storage room, the thing underneath the calculation. I'm going to ask you something. You don't have to answer right now. Ask, she said. Dragunov is not moving Danny to Canal Side. He's keeping Danny somewhere as insurance while he meets me at a location he controls, where he has the advantage to tell me what he actually wants. He paused. He wants me to come with nothing. What he doesn't know is that you've already seen the South Side building, and your face isn't in his files. Another pause, heavier. I need someone who can move without a tail. She understood what he was saying before he finished saying it. You want me to go back tonight, she said, while you go to Canal Side, while Dragunov's attention is on you. With Callow, not alone, but without the kind of footprint that Dragunov's people would clock as mine. He held her gaze. I would not ask you if I saw another option. I want you to know that. She looked at him. She thought about Danny on the concrete floor trying to look brave for a camera. She thought about the flat voice on the phone and the warm voice on the phone and the 4 words on the screen and the photograph of the building and all of it, the whole engineered architecture of this, built carefully, patiently, by someone who had decided that the fastest road to Roman Moretti went directly through her. I know, she said. I'll go. Roman nodded once. Then he looked at Petrov and said, Full team on Canal Side perimeter, 200 meters. Close enough to move, but not close enough to spook him. And I want Gallo tracking every vehicle that comes within 4 blocks of the South Side building between now and midnight. And if Dragunov brings more than a conversation to Canal Side, Petrov said, then we have a different evening than planned. And Marcus, Evelyn said, where is he now? The room shifted slightly. It was a small shift, Petrov's posture, Gallo's hands going still on the keyboard. But she caught it. She had spent 9 months learning to read the shifts in this particular room of men. She looked at Roman. Marcus Vane is currently being held at a secure location, he said. His voice was completely flat. Voluntarily, for his own protection, while we determine the scope of the breach. She held his gaze. Voluntarily, she said. He didn't look away. You don't know yet, she said, whether his phone was taken or whether he gave it. No, Roman said, I don't. The word landed in the room and stayed there. 11 years. A man who had been beside him through things she could only guess at. And now Roman was sitting in a basement conference room, genuinely unable to determine whether the person he had trusted most in this world was a victim or the source. She watched his face hold that. Hold it without breaking. Tonight, he said, we get your brother. After that, he stopped. Looked at the phone still on the table with the photograph of Danny and the message from V. After that, we deal with what's left. At 11:45, Callow drove her back toward the South Side rail yards in the dark. Roman's convoy was moving simultaneously toward Canal Side, 15 minutes west. 2 separate moves, 1 night, 1 chance for each of them to work. She watched the city pass in the window. She thought about Roman walking into a building that Dragunov controlled at midnight with no soldiers, because the alternative was her brother dying on a concrete floor with blood at his hairline. She thought about the way he had said, I would not ask you if I saw another option. She thought about a lot of things in that car, in the dark, crossing a sleeping city that had no idea what was moving through it. Her phone buzzed one more time. The warm voice's number. Not a call. A text. You're smarter than he deserves. That's not a compliment to either of you. When this is over, you should think about who actually kept you safe tonight. She stared at it. The car turned south. The rail yards appeared ahead in the dark, and somewhere inside that squat brick building, Danny was waiting. She turned the phone face down on her thigh and did not answer. But the message sat in her chest like a splinter, small and specific and working its way deeper with every breath. Because whoever had sent it knew something she didn't. And the night wasn't over yet. The building was exactly where it had been 6 hours ago, which meant nothing, because buildings didn't move and the people inside them did. Callow killed the headlights 2 blocks out and rolled to a stop against the curb with the engine at a murmur. Evelyn had been watching the block since they turned onto it. The same visual sweep she had run that morning, methodical, peripheral, cataloging without staring. The van that had been in the south lot was gone. That was the first thing. "Van's gone," she said quietly. "I see it." Callow was already on his radio, a small encrypted unit clipped to his collar, murmuring in a language she thought might be Polish. He listened. He said something else. He clicked off and looked at her. "Gallo says a vehicle left the lot 40 minutes ago, heading west, toward Canalside." "Possibly." She looked at the building. The man who had been at the north corner that morning was not at the north corner. The roll-down door on the loading dock was in the same position, sitting unevenly in its track, bottom left corner slightly raised. She had noted that this morning. She noted it again now, and it meant one of two things. Either nobody had used that door since, or somebody had used it, and it had settled back the same way, which meant the track was damaged and the door always sat like that. Details. She lived in details. She had always lived in details. "Loading dock," she said. "The track is damaged. If they moved Danny out through the front, there'd be no reason to use the dock, but if they needed to move him quietly—" "The dock puts you into the alley," Callow said. "Less exposure to the street. So if they moved him, it was through the alley. Or he's still inside." She looked at her phone. 11:52. Roman had been at Canalside for 7 minutes. She had no way of knowing what that looked like. She had no way of knowing if it was going the way anyone intended. She had the building in front of her, and Callow beside her, and 8 minutes before midnight, and her brother somewhere in the dark. "We go in," she said. "We wait for Gallo's signal. Callow?" She turned to look at him directly. He was a man she had known for less than 24 hours and trusted with a certainty that surprised her, and she needed him to hear what she was saying. "If Dragunov moved his people to Canalside, this building is as thin as it's going to get. Every minute we sit here is a minute the window closes." She held his gaze. "You know I'm right." He looked at her for a long moment with that unhurried quality he brought to everything. Then he reached into the glove compartment and removed a handgun and checked it with the automatic efficiency of long practice and put it inside his jacket. He reached into the back seat and produced a second one and held it out to her. She looked at it. "You grabbed a kitchen knife at 6 in the morning without thinking about it," he said. "Take it." She took it. The weight of it was specific and uncomfortable, and she held it the way her older cousin had taught her when she was 17, in a neighborhood where knowing how felt like information rather than intention. 2 hands, thumb off the slide. They moved. Callow took the north approach and she took the south, the way they had talked through in the car. Not a complicated plan, because complicated plans required more people and more time than they had. She moved along the building's south wall with her back almost touching the brick, the cold of it bleeding through her jacket, her feet finding the pavement quietly without being told to. The alley behind the building smelled like standing water and rust. A security light above the loading dock threw a yellow cone that didn't reach far enough to matter. She found the dock door and crouched beside it and listened. Voices inside. Not many. 2, maybe. Speaking in what she was now certain was Russian, the same cadence as the flat voice on the phone, though not the same voice. Lower, closer to board. The sound of men doing a job they had done before and were not expecting to be interrupted during. Her earpiece clicked. Callow's voice. Barely a breath. "North entry is unlocked. On your mark." She looked at the bottom corner of the dock door, the gap where it didn't quite meet the floor. Just enough to see light inside. Just enough to see the edge of something. A boot, the leg of a chair, the corner of a plastic zip tie fastener on the ground. Danny was still here. "Mark," she said. She went through the dock door low and fast, pushing it up from the damaged corner, and the noise it made was metal and grinding and not quiet at all. The 2 men inside turned. She had time to register them as roughly where the voices had been, one near the south wall and one seated at a table with a phone. And then Callow came through the north door and the man near the south wall moved toward her, and she did not think about it. She raised the gun and he stopped. People stopped when you raised a gun with both hands and didn't shake. She had not known she could do that without shaking. "Floor," Callow said to the man at the table. And the man at the table looked at Petrov's people who were not there and at Callow who was, and went to the floor. Danny was against the far wall, wrists zip-tied to a pipe at shoulder height, forcing him to stand with his arms above him. He had been standing like that for, she didn't let herself calculate how long. His face when he saw her was the most complicated thing she had seen in 23 years of knowing his face. Relief and shame, and something that was trying to look like it wasn't relief because he was 20 years old and she was his older sister, and he needed very badly to not have needed her to come. She crossed the room and looked at the zip ties and looked at Callow. "Left coat pocket," he said, without looking away from the man on the floor. She found the folding knife, opened it, cut the ties. Danny's arms came down with the specific agony of long immobilization. She had had her arms above her head for 60 seconds at a time, and it hurt. And he had been here for hours. And he didn't make a sound, but his face went white, and he caught himself against the wall. "I got you," she said. Not loud, not with any performance in it, just the fact. "Ev." His voice was rough. "I'm sorry. Later." She gripped his arm. Can you walk?" "Yeah." He pushed off the wall and his legs held. "Yeah, I'm okay." She looked at Callow. He already had his phone out. "Car in 60 seconds, he said. "Side door." They moved, Danny between them. Through a corridor that smelled like mold and old machine oil, and out a side door into the alley, and the car Callow had called was already there. Not the one they had arrived in, a different one, driven by a woman Evelyn hadn't met who drove with the same unhurried efficiency as everyone in Roman's orbit. 60 seconds later, they were moving north, and the building was behind them, and Danny was in the back seat, breathing too fast and trying not to show it. She looked at her phone. 12:04. Roman had been at Canalside for 19 minutes. She texted Gallo. "Danny secure. Moving north. What's the status at Canalside?" The reply took 40 seconds, and when it came, it was 2 words. "Call me." She called. Gallo picked up on the first ring, and his voice had lost the restless energy from the basement conference room and replaced it with something tighter and worse. "Tell me," she said. "Dragunov didn't come alone." Gallo was speaking quietly and fast. "He brought a crew. Not soldiers, not a fight crew. Politicians. Or people who look like politicians. 2 city officials we've identified from the guest list and 1 man from the state attorney's office." A pause. "He's making a public play. He's got documentation. We don't know what kind yet, but he arrived with folders and he's been talking for 15 minutes and Mr. Moretti hasn't left the building." "Is Roman in danger?" "Not the kind we can shoot our way out of." Gallo's voice was careful. "Miss Hart, Dragunov's not trying to kill him. He's trying to own him." She stared at the back of the driver's headrest. "Say that again." "He's got leverage. We don't know the specifics, but he's got something that he's laying out at that table right now, and Mr. Moretti is sitting there and listening to it, which means whatever it is, it's landing." A longer pause. "He asked for you." "Roman asked for me. Dragunov." Gallo's voice went flat. "He made it a condition of the conversation. He wants you at Canalside. Mr. Moretti said no. Dragunov said the documentation goes to the state attorney's office by morning if you're not there in 20 minutes. A breath. "Mr. Moretti called me 30 seconds after that. He told me to find you and tell you, but not to bring you. He said—" Gallo stopped. "What did he say?" "He said it's your choice. He said he won't make it for you." She looked out the window, the south side passing in the dark. Danny in the seat beside her with dried blood at his hairline and his wrists red from the zip ties. Finally quiet, finally safe. Looking at her with the expression of a 20-year-old who has just understood that his debt to his sister has entered a category he has no framework for. She looked at her phone. She looked at the city. "Turn around," she said to the driver. "Miss Hart," Gallo started. "Tell Roman I'm coming." She hung up. Danny grabbed her arm. "Ev, what?" "It's not done yet," she said. She kept her voice level because that was what the situation required, and she was very, very tired of what the situation required, but she was not done yet either. "I'll explain after. Are you okay?" "Truly okay, not pretending." "I'm okay." He was. She looked at him with the particular thoroughness of someone who had been taking inventory of this person's well-being for most of their lives, and she believed him. "Where are we going?" "I need you to stay in the car," she said. "No matter what, you stay with Callow and you stay in the car." He started to argue. She watched him look at her face and stop arguing. The building at 47 Canalside was a converted warehouse near the river, the kind of space that got repurposed every decade, that had been a factory, and then a storage facility, and then an events venue, and was currently, apparently, the location where Viktor Dragunov was attempting to dismantle Roman Moretti's life, with paperwork and politicians. There were 4 vehicles outside, not military grade, town cars, which was somehow worse. Kahlo walked her to the door. She told him to wait in the car with Danny. He did not argue, which meant Roman had told him not to. She had learned to read the shape of Roman's instructions in the way his people moved. Inside, a long table, an industrial space made comfortable with the specific effort of people who needed to perform legitimacy, good chairs, portable lighting, the kind of setup that said, "We are not criminals. We are people who make arrangements." 6 people seated. Roman at one end, still and watchful in the particular way of a man who has been listening for a very long time and cataloging everything and giving nothing back. Viktor Dragunov at the other end. She saw him clearly for the first time. She had built a picture from tone, the warm voice, the comfortable certainty, and the reality of him was both more and less than she had imagined. He was 50 or close to it, well-dressed in the way that spoke of money spent with intention, silver at his temples, a face that had been handsome and still was, in the way that some men's faces just refused to let go of it. He had the posture of a man who had sat at a lot of tables and won at most of them. He smiled when she walked in. It was a full, genuine smile, which was the most unsettling thing about it. "Miss Hart," he said. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." She did not sit down. She looked at Roman. Roman's eyes moved to her face and held there for a moment. Something passed through them, something she couldn't name, something that was not strategy and not calculation but lived underneath both. Then he looked back at Dragunov. "She's here," Roman said. "Whatever you have to say, say it." Dragunov opened one of the folders on the table. He took out a document and slid it the length of the table toward her. She didn't move. He placed it where she could see it from where she stood. A financial record. She looked at it and felt the floor shift in a way that had nothing to do with the building. She knew these numbers. She knew them because she had entered them herself into the Moretti Holdings accounting system 9 months ago when she was setting up the administrative architecture for the quarterly filings. She had typed these figures. She had organized these accounts. What she had not known, what was on this document that had not been in the accounts she had seen, was where they went. Shell companies. 3 of them. Moving money through a series of transfers that looked, on paper, exactly like an attempt to obscure the origin of funds. Funds that connected, through the shells, to a federal investigation that had been running for 2 years into municipal corruption. Funds that appeared in this document to originate from an account that bore Roman Moretti's name on the primary signature line. And on the secondary signature line, the one required for transfers above a certain threshold, her name, Evelyn Hart, Executive Secretary. 9 months of her signature on documents she had signed as a standard part of her administrative duties, now contextualized inside a financial architecture she had never seen and never known existed. "You've been laundering money through accounts that require her authorization," Dragunov said pleasantly. "She doesn't know that, of course. But federal prosecutors don't ask about intent in conspiracy cases with this much paper trail. They ask about signatures." He folded his hands. "Her signature is on 63 documents over 9 months. She is, legally speaking, a co-conspirator whether she knew what she was doing or not." The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at the document. She looked at her name. She had signed so many documents. Every week, part of the routine, Roman's office producing authorization requests for accounts she managed administratively. She had been careful. She had always been careful. She had never signed anything she had reason to question. She had not known to question this. "Roman." Her voice came out level and she did not know how. She looked at him. "Did you know?" He held her gaze. His face was the most complicated thing she had ever seen it be. Multiple layers, moving at different speeds, each one a different kind of painful. He opened his mouth. "Don't answer her," Dragunov said. "The answer doesn't change the document." "Roman." She said his name again, sharper. needing the answer not for strategy and not for leverage, but because she had to know. Did you know what I was signing? The pause was 3 seconds. It was the longest 3 seconds of the past 24 hours, which had contained a significant number of terrible seconds. No, he said. I didn't. She looked at him. She was very good at reading faces, and she believed him, and believing him meant this had been done to both of them, which meant there was a third actor in this room she hadn't accounted for. She looked at the document again. The shell companies, the account structure, the administrative architecture she had set up 9 months ago on the instructions of, who set up the account structure, she said. Not to Dragunov, to Roman. When I came on board, who gave me the administrative setup instructions. Something moved in Roman's face, something cold and clear and arriving like a verdict. Marcus, he said. The word landed. Dragunov watched them both with the satisfaction of a man watching something he built begin to function. Marcus Vane has been working with my organization for 14 months, he said. His phone wasn't stolen. He reported it stolen as a contingency, in case the cloning was traced. He's been feeding information, managing the account structure from the inside, and ensuring that when this moment arrived, everyone would be exactly where they needed to be. He looked at Evelyn. Including you. She thought about the warm voice's text message. You're smarter than he deserves. She thought about how Dragunov had known, within an hour, that she was at the Lakeshore property. She thought about Marcus Vane, who had been Roman's most trusted lieutenant for 11 years, who had set up her administrative onboarding, who had handed her 63 documents to sign over 9 months and watched her sign everyone. She thought about being used. The particular grinding humiliation of having been someone else's instrument without knowing it. She looked at Roman. He was looking at the table. Just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, the control was gone. He looked like a man who had been hit somewhere that doesn't show on the outside. Then it came back. Slowly, visibly, like watching a structure reinforce itself. His face became his face again. He looked at Dragunov. What do you want? A simple transfer of operational authority over the West Side corridor. Your docks, your distribution arrangement with the Port Authority contact. Dragunov's tone was the tone of a man discussing a business merger. And a letter, signed and witnessed, confirming the transfer. After which these documents stay in my possession instead of going to the federal task force that has, by the way, been building toward Roman Moretti for the past 18 months. He paused. Miss Hart's name disappears from everything. She walks away clean. And if I refuse, then by 9 tomorrow morning, 63 documents with her signature land on a federal prosecutor's desk. She goes to prison for something she didn't do, which is a remarkable way for you to repay someone who has been loyal to you for 9 months without knowing what she was being loyal inside of. Dragunov tilted his head. Or you sign. She's free. You keep everything except the West Side corridor, which, let's be honest, has been contested for 2 years anyway. He spread his hands. This is a reasonable offer. The 2 city officials and the man from the state attorney's office sat with the stillness of people who had been paid to witness and were performing that function with professional detachment. She looked at their faces and understood that they were here not as threats but as architecture. Their presence made this legitimate, made the transfer a matter of record, made the whole thing something that could not be easily unwound. Dragunov had not come to fight. He had come to win with paper. She looked at Roman. He was looking at her. Not at Dragunov, not at the documents, not at the witnesses. At her. With that thing underneath the calculation, that older, rawer thing she had first seen in a supply room above a flooded city. She understood looking at him that he was going to sign. Not because the West Side corridor wasn't worth fighting for. Not because Dragunov had won, but because her name was on 63 documents, and he was going to put her outside the blast radius of this, even if it cost him half of everything he had built. She had spent 9 months being careful not to need anyone. She had spent 9 months being invisible and self-sufficient and taking up as little space as possible so that she would never have to be anyone's problem or anyone's liability or anyone's reason to make a sacrifice she hadn't asked for. And here was Roman Moretti, the most dangerous man in Chicago, about to lose a significant portion of his empire because her name was on a document she had signed in good faith, and he was going to do it without asking her whether she wanted him to. She picked up the document from the table. She looked at it. She put it back down. I want 5 minutes, she said. Dragunov raised an eyebrow. Miss Hart, 5 minutes. She looked at him with the steadiness she had developed over 23 years of situations that required more of her than she had. Or I walk out of here and you have a federal witness who can testify to the coercive nature of this entire arrangement, which will complicate your city officials' participation considerably. She held his gaze. 5 minutes. Dragunov studied her. She watched him revise something in his assessment. She could see it happen, the slight recalibration in his eyes. He had planned for her to be a victim, a passive quantity, the woman who got rescued and went home grateful. 5 minutes, he said. She looked at Roman. She tilted her head toward the far end of the warehouse. He stood. They walked far enough from the table that the words would not carry. The space smelled like old river water and rust. A single light above them. His face, up close, in private. The control still there but thinner now, and beneath it the thing she had been seeing pieces of since the storage room. The actual man, as opposed to the performance of the man, exhausted and furious and holding something in at great cost. Don't sign it, she said. His jaw tightened. Evelyn, I know what you're about to do and don't. She kept her voice low and direct. My name on those documents is not your fault. It was Marcus's setup and Dragunov's play, and I signed them in good faith, and I can prove that. It will take time, and it will be ugly, but conspiracy requires intent, and I had none. She watched his face. What you cannot recover from is handing Dragunov the West Side corridor, because it won't stop there. You know it won't stop there. The moment you sign that paper, you become someone who can be moved. And a man who can be moved keeps getting moved until there's nothing left. You don't know that. I know exactly that. She stepped closer, close enough that she was looking up at him, and he was looking down at her. And there was nothing between them except the 6 inches of air and 9 months of careful professional distance that she was currently dismantling without apology. I have watched you for 9 months. I know how this works. The moment you sign is the moment you lose. Not just the corridor, but the thing that makes all the rest of it hold. And I'm not going to be the reason you lose that. She paused. Don't sign. He looked at her for a long moment. The warehouse light above them. The river smell. In the distance, the city moved and breathed and kept its indifferent pace. Then we have no deal, he said quietly. And by morning, we need a different play. She held his gaze. Do you trust me? He said it without hesitation. Yes. She had not expected the speed of it. It landed somewhere in her chest with a weight that was not comfortable and not unwelcome. Then let me think, she said. Give me tonight. He looked at her with that stripped, unguarded quality that she was learning to read as the version of him that lived underneath everything else. Then he nodded once. They walked back to the table. Dragunov watched them approach with the patient expression of a man who had already mentally banked the win. Roman stood at his end of the table. We need more time, he said. Dragunov's pleasant expression didn't change. I gave you 5 minutes. We need until morning. The offer expires at 9. I know when it expires. Roman's voice was level and absolute. We'll have an answer at 8. He looked at the 2 city officials. And you might want to review who you came here representing tonight before you decide which side of this you want to be recorded on. He left. She followed. Behind them, Dragunov called out, not angry, not rattled, just making a point. 8 o'clock, Mr. Moretti. After that, Miss Hart goes to prison for a very long time, and it will be the first thing in her life she didn't earn. The door swung shut behind them. Outside, in the cold air by the river, Roman stopped walking. He stood with his back to her for a moment, and she watched his shoulders carry something enormous and invisible. And she understood that the man she was looking at had just been handed the worst kind of betrayal. Not an enemy attacking from outside, but 11 years of trust turned inside out and sharpened into a weapon. She said nothing. She simply stood beside him in the cold. After a moment, he turned around. His face was closed and controlled, and underneath it, she could see it now. She could always see it now. Something that was neither. Marcus, he said. Just the name. Just the weight of it. Yes, she said. I need to see him. I know. He looked at the river, the black water moving under the lights. Then he looked at her. and the thing in his face when he looked at her was different from everything else. Different from the betrayal and the strategy and the exhaustion. It was the thing she had been refusing to name. "I meant what I said," he told her. "In the warehouse. I was going to sign." "I know you were. That's not—" He stopped. Started again. "That's not something I do. I don't make that kind of trade. Not for anyone." She looked at him. The river, the cold, the city around them still moving and indifferent. "I know," she said quietly. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he looked away, back toward the cars. His voice came back controlled, the professional velocity returning. "We have until 8, he said. "Let's find Marcus Vane." She followed him toward the car, and her mind was already running, already pulling at the architecture of what Dragunov had built, looking for the seam, the place where 63 signatures and 14 months of Marcus's careful work had left something exposed. Something she could use. It was there. She could feel it the way she felt errors in documents, a wrongness in the texture, a place where the structure didn't. The seam was in the timestamps. Evelyn understood it fully, somewhere between Canalside and the Caldwell Tower, sitting in the back of Roman's car with her phone screen at full brightness and the financial documents Gallo had managed to pull from Dragunov's leaked copies running across her vision in the dark. She had been turning it over since the warehouse. The wrongness she had felt in the texture of the document, the place where the structure didn't hold. And now she had it, specific and sharp, and almost beautiful in its simplicity. Marcus Vane had been meticulous. The account architecture was clean. The shell companies were properly sequenced. The authorization trail looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. 63 documents over 9 months, each one carrying her signature on the secondary line. He had been patient and precise, and he had built something that would hold up to casual scrutiny without question. What he had not accounted for was that she had a memory for administrative detail that bordered on pathological. "The transfers on the 15th of each month?" she said. Not to Roman specifically, to the car, to the dark outside the window. The authorization request came through on the 14th. Always the 14th, 7 days before the regular payroll cycle. I remember because it disrupted the sequencing, and I mentioned it to Marcus once, and he said the account had a non-standard settlement period, and I logged it and moved on. She looked at Roman. "I logged it. Date, time, the exact language he used to explain it. It's in my administrative journal. I keep one separate from the system files because the system files can be altered and physical records can't." Roman was watching her. "Where's the journal?" "My apartment? Desk drawer." She was already texting Callow, who had peeled off 20 minutes ago to take Danny to a safe location. If the timestamps on the authorization request show that Marcus was initiating them from outside the system, from his personal access rather than the administrative queue, that breaks the conspiracy structure. It shows the documents were routed to me through a back door he controlled, not through standard procedure, which means I wasn't a co-signatory. I was a forged one. "Can you prove the routing?" "The system logs everything, every access point, every routing path, every modification. Marcus could alter the account records, but he couldn't alter the system architecture logs without triggering an audit flag. Those are maintained by the building's IT infrastructure, not by Moretti Holdings internally." She looked at him. "If Gallo can pull the server logs from the past 9 months tonight, we have him. Not just as Dragunov's asset, as the actual author of the financial crime." Roman held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he was on his phone. The basement conference room at 2:30 in the morning looked like the inside of a machine running too hot. Gallo at the monitors with the focused intensity of someone who had moved past tired into a second state entirely. 2 IT people she had never met pulling server architecture on laptops. Petrov standing against the wall with his arms crossed, and his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has been asked to be patient for longer than his nature allows. Marcus Vane was in a room down the corridor. Roman had told her that in the car. He had said it the way he said things he needed to say, and did not want to. Flatly, briefly, with the weight distributed evenly across every syllable, so none of them collapsed under it. "He's been there since this morning," Roman said. "Voluntarily, I told you. He came in himself when I called him, said he wanted to help." Something moved in his jaw. He's been sitting in that room for 16 hours helping. She had not asked what helping meant. She had a sense of what it meant in this context, and she did not need it detailed. At 3:15, Gallo found the first routing anomaly. Here. He pointed at the screen. She came around the table and looked. The server log entry was dry and technical, and to anyone without administrative context, it would have meant nothing. To her, it was a door blown open. The authorization request on September 14th came through a personal access node registered to Terminal 7. Terminal 7 is Marcus Vane's executive workstation, not the administrative queue, not the standard routing. Gallo scrolled. All 63 documents, every single one, routed from his terminal, not the queue. He didn't just set up the accounts, she said. He personally initiated every authorization request, every time, bypassing the standard administrative pipeline and sending them directly to my queue as if they were routine. She looked at Roman. He had to know I wouldn't question routine requests. I had no reason to look at the routing path on something that came through the way everything else came through. Can you print that? Roman said to Gallo. All of it, time-stamped and certified. Give me 20 minutes. You have 10. She went to the corridor. Not toward Marcus's room. She was not ready for that, and she wasn't sure what ready would feel like when it arrived. She went the other direction to the small anteroom with the coffee machine that nobody had cleaned in approximately a geological era, and she stood at the counter and put both palms flat on it and breathed. 9 months. She had been inside something for 9 months without knowing what she was inside of. Marcus had watched her sign 63 documents and brought her coffee twice when she stayed late and asked after her brother with what she had read as genuine warmth, and she had believed all of it. She had believed it because it had looked exactly like warmth, because he was very good at this, because the best betrayals always are. She breathed. Then she picked up the cold coffee from 2 hours ago and drank it, because her body needed something, and this was what was available, and she had long practice at making do with what was available. Roman appeared in the doorway. He looked at her with the particular attention he gave her now. Not the measuring precision from before, but something more direct, something that had stopped pretending to be purely professional. You should rest for an hour, he said. Gallo's pulling the logs. There's nothing you can do in the next 40 minutes that I can't. I want to talk to Marcus. The silence was brief and total. Evelyn, I know you've already talked to him. I know what you've been doing in that room for 16 hours, and I'm not asking you to stop. She looked at him. I want 5 minutes. With him. Alone. His jaw worked. It's not, say, productive, appropriate. She held his gaze. Roman. He used me as a tool for 9 months. He put my name on 63 documents that could have sent me to federal prison. I want to look him in the face. She paused. 5 minutes. He looked at her for a long moment. The corridor light was harsh and yellow and made everything look like a confession. He stepped back from the doorway. 5 minutes, he said. Marcus Vane was seated at a table in a room that contained a table, 2 chairs, and a light fixture with no shade. He looked like a man who had been talking for a long time and had arrived at the other side of it, hollowed out, not broken, which she found she resented more than broken would have been. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had probably looked trustworthy his entire life, and had clearly understood the value of that. He looked at her when she came in. His expression did something complicated that she didn't bother to interpret. She sat down across from him and put her hands flat on the table so they were visible and still. She looked at him. The September 14th request, she said. The one where I asked you why it was coming through early and you told me about the non-standard settlement period. He blinked. It was a very small movement, but she caught it. You had that prepared, she said. The explanation. It came too fast and it was too specific. I noted it at the time and then I let it go because I had no reason not to let it go. She tilted her head slightly. Did you know I kept a physical log? He said nothing. I do. Date, time, exact language. 9 months of it. She watched his face. Did Dragunov know? Still nothing. His hands were folded on the table with a stillness that cost him something. She could see the cost in the tendons. I'm not here to get a confession, she said. Roman's people have the server logs. We have what we need. She paused. I'm here because I want to understand one thing. Not for the case. For me. She looked at him steadily. Did you know what it would do to him? The first crack. Small. Around the eyes. 14 months, she said. You've been running this for 14 months. That's 2 years into a friendship of 11 years. You had 7 years of whatever that was before you started building the exit. She kept her voice level, conversational, entirely without heat. The heat was there, but she had put it somewhere it couldn't interfere. Did you know what it would do to him when he found out? Marcus Vane looked at the table. His jaw moved once without producing words. Then he looked up, and his eyes were doing something she recognized as the involuntary honesty of a man who is too exhausted to maintain the version of himself that doesn't feel things. Yes, he said. Then I don't have any more questions, she said. She stood. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and did not turn around. He trusted you more than he trusted himself, she said. I've known him 9 months, and I can see that. You had 11 years of it. A pause. Whatever Dragunov offered you, it wasn't worth that. You know it wasn't worth that. She pushed the door open. I hope you know that. She walked back to the conference room and did not allow herself to feel anything about the conversation until she was sitting down and had something concrete to focus on. Then she allowed it, briefly. The anger, the particular violation of having been someone's instrument, the image of Marcus's face doing that small involuntary thing around the eyes. She allowed it for 30 seconds, and then she put it away, because it was 4 in the morning and they had until 8, and the server logs were printing and the journal was in her apartment in a desk drawer, and there was still a very great deal of work to do. Petrov retrieved the journal. He was back by 5. She sat with Gallo and cross-referenced every entry against the server log timestamps until they had a document that was, she was fairly certain, airtight. The routing anomalies, the physical log entries, the system architecture data, all of it building a picture that showed not a conspiracy of 2, but a manufactured attribution. Her name, placed on documents she had been directed to sign through a backdoored pipeline, by a man who had administrative access to ensure she would never see the routing path. At 6:15, Roman sat down beside her at the table. Not across. Beside. He looked at what she had built and he read it the way she had watched him read complex documents before. Fast, thorough, nothing skimmed. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling. It's enough, he said. It's more than enough. She was running on no sleep and cold coffee and something that had replaced adrenaline with a kind of hard, clarifying anger. But we need to move before 8. If we walk into Dragunov's meeting with this, he'll know Marcus broke. He'll pull the trigger on whatever contingency he has. He'll have a contingency, Roman said. Yes. So we don't give him the meeting. She looked at Roman. We take this to the state attorney's office ourselves. Before 8. Before Dragunov's deadline. We hand them the server logs and the journal, and a full account of how Marcus Vane constructed a financial architecture designed to implicate an unknowing signatory in a criminal conspiracy. And we hand them Marcus himself, who I guarantee will cooperate fully now because the alternative is Roman Moretti in whatever room he's been sitting in for 16 hours. She paused. We turned the weapon around. Roman looked at her. Something in his face that she was learning to read as the version of him that was allowed to be genuinely surprised. If we go to the state attorney before Dragunov does, he said slowly, we control the narrative. We're the disclosure, not the target. You have legitimate business operations. The Moretti Holdings corporate filings are clean. The criminal accounts were Marcus's construction, documented as such now. You walk in as the wronged party reporting an internal fraud. She met his gaze. It won't make everything disappear. There are things in your history that can't be papered over. But this specific weapon, the one Dragunov spent 14 months building, you can take it out of his hands entirely. He was quiet for a long moment. The basement hummed around them. Gallo had fallen asleep in his chair 3 feet away, and nobody had the heart to wake him. There's a man in the state attorney's office, Roman said carefully. Not Dragunov's man. I've been careful to know which ones aren't. He paused. He owes me something. Nothing illegal. I did him a personal favor 4 years ago and I haven't called it in. Another pause. This would be calling it in. Call it, she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he picked up his phone. The next 90 minutes were the most deliberately calm she had ever spent. Roman made 3 calls. Petrov made 2. She organized the documentation into a sequence that told the story in the order a prosecutor would need to receive it: context first, evidence second, corroboration third. She had done this kind of organizational work for 9 months without knowing what it was in service of. She knew now, and the knowledge didn't make the work feel different. The work felt like the work. It was what she had. At 7:40, Roman's contact at the state attorney's office confirmed he would receive them. At 7:50, they were in a car heading north. Roman, Evelyn, Petrov. The documentation in a locked case. The morning coming up gray and cold over the lake. Roman looked at her in the car. "You haven't slept." "Neither have you." "I'm used to it." "So am I." She looked out the window, the city coming awake. Early traffic, the first buses, the delivery trucks making their rounds through streets that were wet from last night's rain. "Danny texted me at 6. He's okay. Callow has him." "Good." A pause. "Your brother. The debt. The original amount. I want to handle that." She looked at him. "Roman, not a gift," he said. "I know you won't take it as a gift. Consider it the organizational liability it actually is. Dragunov manufactured a situation that put your family in danger in order to reach me. The remediation of that situation is appropriately my problem." He held her gaze. "Let me fix it." She thought about arguing. She had a fully prepared argument: autonomy, self-sufficiency, the importance of not becoming financially entangled with a man whose money came from. She had the whole thing ready. She looked at him, and she let the argument go. "Okay," she said. Something in his face shifted, something quiet and significant. He looked back out the window, and she looked back out hers, and they rode the rest of the way in a silence that had changed in character from every previous silence between them. Easier, somehow. Less space between them and the truth of what the past 24 hours had made evident. The state attorney's contact, a compact, precise man named Calloway, who looked like he had been woken from 3 hours of sleep and handled it by putting on a very good suit, received them in a conference room on the 7th floor with the careful, neutral expression of a man managing several kinds of professional risks simultaneously. He looked at the documentation. He asked 6 questions. He asked them twice each. He made a call from a phone that was not his desk phone. At 8:03, Dragunov's deadline passed. At 8:11, Calloway looked up from the documentation and said, "I'll need you to remain available today." "We're available," Roman said. "The routing evidence is significant. If it holds up to our technical review, and I believe it will, the original conspiracy framework collapses entirely." He looked at Evelyn with the slightly recalibrated expression that people had been giving her for the past 24 hours. The one that meant they had started by discounting her and were in the process of revising that assessment. "Miss Hart, you'll want your own counsel present. I can recommend—" "I'll manage my own representation," she said. He blinked once. "Of course." At 8:30, Roman's phone rang. He looked at the screen and showed it to her. "Dragunov." He declined the call. It rang again. He declined again. On the 3rd call, he answered. He said nothing. He simply held the phone and let Dragunov talk. And she couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone shift from controlled to less controlled over the course of 40 seconds. And then Roman said, "You should talk to your contact in Calloway's office. He's going to have an interesting morning." He hung up. They looked at each other across the conference table. "It's not over," he said. "I know. He'll have contingencies, people who weren't in that warehouse, arrangements that don't depend on the documentation. I know. This bought us time and leverage. It didn't buy us safety." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "What does Dragunov do when a plan fails?" Roman's expression did the thing it did when he was calculating. He doesn't accept failure. He resets. He'll come at this from a different direction. A pause. He'll come at it through whatever he still controls. The underworld channels, the criminal leaders he has relationships with. He set the phone on the table. He's going to want a more direct confrontation. She thought about this warehouse, the folders, the politicians with their professional detachment. Dragunov had come to that meeting prepared to win with paper and process, and he had lost. And men who built elaborate constructions and watched them fail did not respond by building more elaborate constructions. They responded with the thing underneath the constructions. "He's going to come at you directly," she said. "Yes." "When?" "Soon. Today, possibly. Tonight, more likely. He looked at his hands on the table, the old scar across the left one. There are protocols for this. Among the organizations in this city, there are traditions for resolving direct conflicts between principals. Dragunov knows them. A pause. He'll invoke them. What does that mean, invoke them? He looked up at her. His face was doing the thing where multiple layers moved at different speeds. It means he can demand a direct resolution, one-on-one, witnessed by the other organizations. The outcome is binding. Whoever wins holds the contested territory and the contested leverage, and the losing party withdraws all claims. She looked at him. You mean he can challenge you to a fight? An older word for it, but yes. His voice was level. And I can't refuse without forfeiting the West Side Corridor and everything associated with it. The traditions are the traditions. Every organization in the city respects them because they exist to prevent wars that would cost everyone more than they're worth. He held her gaze. If he invokes it tonight, I accept. She looked at Viktor Dragunov in her memory. The silver temples, the confident posture, the smile that had been the most unsettling thing in the warehouse. She thought about what a man who had built 14 months of careful architecture and watched it dismantle in a single night would look like when he stopped building and started breaking. He's not inviting you to a conversation, she said. No. Roman picked up the phone again. He's inviting me to prove which one of us deserves to still be standing at the end of it. His phone rang while it was in his hand. Not Dragunov. Petrov. He answered. He listened for 11 seconds. His face went completely, absolutely still in a way she had not seen before. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his expression, but the stillness of a man receiving information that has knocked the management out of him. He hung up. She watched him. Marcus Vane is dead, he said. The room was very quiet. Calloway's assistant was typing something in the outer office, the sound coming through the wall muffled and rhythmic and absurdly ordinary. How? She said. The room he was being held in. Roman's voice was completely flat. Someone got inside while Petrov's men were rotating. 30-minute window. He set the phone on the table with a deliberateness that told her exactly how much force he was not using. Dragunov cleaned his own asset before Marcus could give us anything else, before he could testify. She thought about the room down the corridor, the table, the 2 chairs, the bare light fixture. Marcus's hands folded on the table with a stillness that cost him something, his eyes doing that involuntary, honest thing. Yes. He knew Marcus would cooperate, she said. He always planned to remove him if the plan failed. She looked at Roman. He's been several steps ahead this entire time. Until an hour ago, Roman said. The documentation changes that, but it doesn't change what Marcus knew that he hasn't told us yet. Whatever Dragunov didn't want coming out, it died with Marcus. Roman stood. He moved to the window. The city spread out below them, mid-morning traffic, the lake flat and gray in the distance. He stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and she watched him hold it, all of it, the whole weight of the last 18 hours, the betrayal and the architecture and now this, the final piece of it, the one that couldn't be undone or documented or turned into leverage. His oldest friend. His most trusted lieutenant, gone. And she couldn't tell, from his back, whether he was grieving the man or the idea of the man, and she suspected, looking at the set of his shoulders, that he couldn't entirely tell either. He turned around. His face was closed. Not the careful professional performance of closed, something harder, something that had gone past closed to a place she didn't have a word for. I hope. Dragunov will invoke the challenge tonight, he said. He'll make sure every principal in the city knows about the documentation loss and what it means. He'll frame it as incomplete, as a failed attempt. He'll invoke the challenge from a position of perceived strength because he's controlled the narrative in those circles for long enough that they'll let him. He looked at her. We need to be there first. There. The gathering tonight, I need to call it. I need to be the one who convenes it on my terms at a location I control. If I let him call it, he controls the room. His jaw was set. I call the gathering. I present the documentation to every principal in the city. I make the case in their language, on their terms, and I let them be the witnesses. A pause. And when Dragunov invokes the challenge, And he will, because he has no other play left. I accepted in front of all of them. She stood. She was so tired that she could feel the edges of her vision doing something imprecise. But she stood, and she looked at him, and she said, "Where?" "The Caldwell Tower, the main floor, tonight at 9. He looked at her directly. "I want you there." "I'll be there." "Evelyn." He said her name with the weight he sometimes put in it. Not command, not request, something older and more necessary than either. "I need you to understand what tonight is. What it might... I understand. You don't know that you... Roman." She held his gaze. "I have been inside this with you for the past 24 hours. I have not looked away from any of it. I'm not going to look away from the last part." She paused. "I'll be there." He held her gaze for a long moment with the stripped, unguarded quality that kept arriving on his face now, reliably, in the spaces where the architecture fell away. Then he nodded. Outside the window, the city moved through its morning with the indifferent momentum of a thing too large to be stopped by any single catastrophe. In 9 hours, every criminal principal in Chicago would be in one room. In 9 hours, Viktor Dragunov would look across that room at Roman Moretti and invoke a tradition that turned everything into one single, physical, irreversible moment. And somewhere in the documentation they had handed to Calloway that morning, in the server logs and the time-stamped journal entries and the carefully reconstructed routing paths, there was a detail that Evelyn had noticed and not yet said out loud. A small, specific wrongness in the margin of one of Marcus's authorization records, a notation that didn't match anything in the official account structure, a reference number she had seen once before in a file that had nothing to do with financial accounts. She had not said it yet because she had not yet understood what it meant. In the car back to the Caldwell Tower, watching the city go by, she turned it over. The reference number, the file it connected to. The name at the top of that file, which was not Marcus Vane and was not Viktor Dragunov, but was someone she had processed correspondence for 3 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when she had stayed late, and logged the work in her physical journal with the date and time, and the reference number connected to a man named Gerald Holt. Evelyn had processed correspondence for him on a Tuesday in August, 3 months into her tenure, when Roman had been in New York for 4 days, and the office had run on its own quiet momentum. Holt was listed in the Moretti Holdings files as a municipal liaison, a consultant who facilitated conversations between the organization's legitimate real estate interests and city planning offices. She had routed 2 letters under his name, logged them in her journal with the date and time, and moved on. She had not thought about Gerald Holt again until the car ride back from Calloway's office, when the reference number in Marcus's authorization record pulled the name out of 9 months of careful administrative memory like a hook pulling something up from deep water. Gerald Holt was not in the Moretti Holdings files anymore. She checked on her phone in the car. His consultant profile had been removed. Not recently, not in the past 24 hours, but 4 months ago, quietly, without notation. The kind of removal that happened when someone handled the administrative housekeeping themselves rather than routing it through her. Marcus had handled the administrative housekeeping. She understood, sitting in that car with the morning city moving past the window, that Gerald Holt was not a municipal liaison. He was a conduit. The reference number in Marcus's authorization record was a billing code. She recognized the structure now, that she was looking at it as a billing code rather than an account notation, and it connected to payments that had flowed not to Dragunov's shells, but to a separate entity entirely. A third party, someone who had been receiving money from Marcus Vane's constructed financial architecture for at least 9 months, possibly longer, and whose name had been removed from the organizational files before anyone started looking. She told Roman in the elevator up to the Caldwell Tower. He listened without interrupting. By the time the doors opened on the main floor, he had already called Gallo. "Gerald Holt," he said. "Everything. Bank records, addresses, organizational affiliations, anything connected to a billing code." He read her the number from her phone screen. "Now, before noon." Gallo had it by 11:40. Gerald Holt was a retired deputy from the Cook County Sheriff's Office. He had been retired for 6 years, and in those 6 years had built a quiet consulting practice that moved money for 3 separate criminal organizations in the city. Not large amounts, not conspicuous amounts, but steady and consistent and invisible because a former law enforcement contact was the last person a financial audit looked at twice. He had been Marcus's external accountant for the shell company architecture. He was the reason the shells had held up under casual scrutiny, because he had constructed them using the structural knowledge of a man who had spent 20 years watching people try to hide money and knowing exactly where investigators looked and didn't look. He was also, according to Gallo's records pulled from a county contractor database, currently employed as an independent consultant to the Cook County State Attorney's Office. She read that line twice. Then she looked up at Roman. "Calloway," she said. "Maybe." Roman's voice was very controlled. "Or someone in Calloway's office. Or Holt is insulation. Someone above Calloway who needed distance between themselves and the money." He looked at Gallo. "Can you trace the billing code payments to a destination account?" "Give me an hour." "You have 30 minutes. She sat at the table and thought about Calloway's face that morning. The precise suit, the 6 questions asked twice, the careful neutral expression of a man managing professional risk. She thought about whether that expression was the expression of a man in a difficult situation or the expression of a man performing a difficult situation. She had been reading faces for 24 hours in conditions that stripped away most of the performance, and she thought about Calloway's face again, and she thought it had been real. She thought the difficulty had been real. But real difficulty and clean hands were not the same thing. Gallo had the destination account in 22 minutes. It traced through 2 more shells, smaller ones, less sophisticated, built in a hurry or built by someone who was good, but not as good as they thought, and landed on a personal account registered to a name she did not recognize, but that Roman clearly did, because when he read it off the screen, his posture changed in a way she had not seen before. Something went out of him, not the control. Something underneath the control that she had not known was there until it was gone. "Say the name," she said. He said it. It was the name of a man who held a senior position in one of the other criminal organizations in the city. Not Dragunov's, a different one. A man who had been, according to everything she had seen in Roman's files, a neutral party. An ally, in the particular way that powerful men who are not quite friends maintain usefulness to each other. A man who would be in the room tonight. "He's been playing both sides," Roman said, "funding Dragunov's operation against me through Marcus while maintaining the neutral position in the room." He was quiet for a moment. "If Dragunov wins tonight, he inherits the West Side corridor, and this man inherits the secondary territory Dragunov vacates on the north side. They've been dividing my operation between them for 14 months on paper." He looked at the screen. Marcus didn't just build Dragunov's weapon. He built both their retirement plans. She thought about Marcus in that room. Yes. The involuntary honesty of a man too exhausted to maintain the version of himself that didn't feel things. She thought about what the full picture looked like now. Not a betrayal of loyalty for money, but a betrayal of loyalty for survival, the kind that happens when a man realizes the organization he gave 11 years to is being circled by 2 larger forces and decides the only move left is to choose one of them before the choice gets made for him. She still didn't forgive it, but she understood the shape of it now, and understanding the shape of something was different from excusing it. "Tonight," she said, "you need to present this in the room before Dragunov invokes the challenge. All of it, not just the documentation about me, but Holt, the billing code, the destination account, the alliance." She looked at Roman. "If you walk in there with only half the picture, Dragunov's ally controls the witness pool. He shapes how the other organizations receive what they're seeing. If I walk in with the full picture, he'll know he's exposed the moment I open the file." Roman's eyes were doing that calculation that never fully stopped. "He'll try to move before I can present it." "Then you need to present it fast. Or," he said slowly, "I give it to someone else to present." She looked at him. "The room tonight will have 12 principals," he said. "I need a majority to receive the evidence as legitimate, as credible, as complete, as presented by someone with no organizational stake in the outcome." He held her gaze. "Someone who can stand in that room and lay out the financial architecture, the routing evidence, the Holt connection, and the destination account in a sequence that a room full of men who do not trust each other can follow and verify." She understood what he was asking. She understood it completely, and she felt the weight of it land in her chest with the specific gravity of a thing that cannot be put back down once you have picked it up. "You want me to present it?" she said. "You built the documentation. You understand it at a level no one else in my organization does. And you are the only person in that room tonight who Dragunov's ally cannot credibly accuse of organizational bias. He paused. You're not one of mine. You're not one of anyone's. You're a woman who was used as a tool by two men and who then spent the night dismantling what they built. He held her gaze. That's not a liability in that room. That's the only currency those men actually respect. She looked at the screen. The destination account. The name. The architecture of 14 months of patience and betrayal laid out in columns and routing codes and billing numbers. If something goes wrong in that room, she said, it won't. Roman, I will not let anything happen to you in that room. His voice was not a reassurance and not a performance. It was the flattest, most absolute thing she had heard him say in 24 hours of hearing him say absolute things. I give you my word. She thought about what his word was worth. She thought about 36 hours ago, standing in a supply room, pressing her hands over her mouth so no one would hear her cry, believing she was entirely alone in something too large for one person to hold. She thought about a locked door and a question asked without inflection. Who made you cry? Okay, she said, walk me through the room. They spent 4 hours preparing, not just the documentation sequence, but the physical reality of the space. The Caldwell Tower's main conference floor reconfigured, the chairs positioned, the sightlines managed. Roman walked her through each principal who would be present, their organizational affiliations, their relationships to each other, their known positions on the Moretti-Dragunov conflict. She absorbed it with the same methodical attention she brought to complex administrative architecture. She asked questions. He answered them without condescension, without the faint masculine impatience she had encountered everywhere else she had ever asked questions in rooms like this. At 5 p.m, Danny called. She stepped out of the conference room to take it. He was at the safe house with Callow, he said. He was fine. He had eaten something. He sounded like a 20-year-old who had been through 30 hours of something he would be processing for the rest of his life. Are you okay? He said. Ev, are you actually okay? She leaned against the wall in the corridor. The fluorescent light buzzed. She thought about everything she could say. I'm going to be, she said. Tonight I need to do one more thing and then it's done. What thing? The kind I'm good at. She paused. Numbers and documents and making sure a room full of dangerous people understand a sequence of events correctly. He was quiet for a moment. You're not what I thought you were, he said. Not an accusation, something closer to wonder. Yes, I am, she said. I'm exactly what I always was. I just stopped hiding it. She went back into the conference room. At 8:59, the principals arrived. She stood at the side of the room and watched them come in. 12 men. Some she recognized from Roman's files. Some she was seeing for the first time. They moved through the space with the careful, weighted awareness of men who had spent their lives reading rooms for threat, and every one of them looked at her at some point in the first 3 minutes with the same recalibrated expression, the small revision, the adjusting of an assumption. She was not what they had expected to find in this room. She understood that, and she used it the way she had learned in the past 36 hours to use the things that other people underestimated. Dragunov arrived at 9:02. He came in with the controlled confidence of a man who had already decided how the evening ended, and he looked at the room and at Roman and at Evelyn, and his pleasant expression did something small and precise that she caught and filed away. He had not expected her to be standing at the front of the room. He had expected her to be somewhere safe, somewhere removed, somewhere that removed her from the equation. He had miscalculated her. Again. Apparently it was a habit. His ally, the man whose name had come off the destination account, arrived 90 seconds later. He was older than she had imagined from the file. Heavy-set, with careful eyes, and the practiced ease of a man who had maintained a neutral position in violent situations for long enough that the neutrality had become its own kind of armor. He looked at Dragunov once, briefly, the way two people look at each other when they share a secret in a room full of people who don't know it yet. She noted the look. She noted where he sat. She noted the angle between his chair and Dragunov's. Roman opened the gathering. He kept it brief. The formal language of the tradition, the acknowledgement of the assembled principles, the statement of the dispute. His voice was even and authoritative, and carried the particular weight of a man who has inhabited power for long enough that the room arranges itself around him without being asked. Then he said, "Before any challenge is invoked, there is evidence the room needs to see. I'm going to ask someone to present it." Dragunov's posture shifted slightly. His ally's hands moved on the table. Evelyn walked to the front of the room. She did not look at Dragunov when she began. She looked at the principals, at the 12 men who constituted the witness pool, whose collective judgment was the only thing in this room that actually mattered. She laid it out the way she had organized every complex document in her professional life. Context first, evidence second, corroboration third. The account architecture, the routing anomalies, the physical journal, the server logs, the billing code, Gerald Holt, the destination account. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not use notes. She had never needed notes for things she had built herself. When she got to the destination account, she placed the printed record on the table, and she looked up and she said the name directly, and she watched the ally's face in the moment she said it. She watched the armor of practiced neutrality crack down the middle like old concrete, fast and then slower, the full extent of the damage arriving in pieces. The financial architecture constructed by Marcus Vane, under instruction from Viktor Dragunov, and with the active participation of the individual I just named, was designed to accomplish 3 things, she said. Her voice was level. She had put everything that was not level somewhere it couldn't interfere, and she would retrieve it later, in private, and let it do what it needed to do. First, to implicate an unknowing employee, me, as a co-conspirator in order to create leverage over Roman Moretti. Second, to position a fraudulent documentation set as federal evidence, giving Dragunov's organization the ability to remove Moretti from the field through legal exposure rather than direct confrontation. Third, to divide Moretti's operational territory between 2 organizations who had agreed in advance how the division would work. She looked at the room. What it was not designed to survive was the person it used deciding to look at the architecture from the inside. The room was quiet. Dragunov said, "This is fabricated. The server logs are maintained by the Caldwell Towers third-party IIT infrastructure," she said. "Not by Moretti Holdings, not by me. If you want to challenge the authenticity of the routing data, you're challenging the IT records of a building owned by a real estate trust that has no organizational affiliation with anyone in this room." She held his gaze. "Take that position if you want to. I'd be curious to watch you make it." Dragunov said nothing. His ally said nothing. The room made a sound that was not quite a murmur and not quite silence. The collective sound of 12 men revising a calculation simultaneously. One of the principals, a man in his 60s whom she recognized from Roman's files as the longest-standing member of the assembled group, a man whose opinion in this room carried a particular gravitational weight, looked at the documentation on the table and then looked at Dragunov's ally. "Is your name on that account?" he said. Not loudly, not with any performance of accusation, just the question, placed in the room the way a stone is placed on a scale. The silence lasted 5 seconds. "Step down," the old man said. "Whatever you want to invoke tonight, step down from it. You've been heard. The room has seen the evidence." He looked at Dragunov. "You as well." Dragunov's face went through something she watched with clinical attention. The pleasantness was gone, stripped entirely, and underneath it was the thing that had always been underneath it. The thing that all of the patient construction and the warm voice and the careful architecture had been built to keep covered. A man who had spent 14 months building something intricate and expensive and had watched it come apart in 11 minutes, presented by the woman he had intended to bury inside it. He looked at Roman. "Challenge," he said. Just the word. Flat and final. "I invoke the challenge." The room shifted. The old man sat back. Several others exchanged looks. The tradition was the tradition. It couldn't be refused and couldn't be redirected, and the evidence in front of them changed the context but not the right. Dragunov had the right, and he had chosen to use it, and now the room would witness what it witnessed. Roman looked at Evelyn. She looked back. She had known this was coming. They had both known, and she had prepared herself for the knowledge that she could not prevent it, and that preparation had not made the knowledge smaller, only more specific. "Accepted," Roman said. The gathering moved. There was a space below the main floor. She had not known about it, and she suspected most people outside this room didn't either. A large, open industrial space that the building had swallowed when the tower was constructed around the original foundation. Concrete floors and high ceilings, and the particular acoustics of a room designed to contain things that needed containing. The principals arranged themselves around the perimeter. Petrov stood near the door. Kalo had arrived at some point in the past hour and stood close enough to Evelyn that she could feel the warmth of him without turning to look. Dragunov removed his jacket. Roman removed his. She watched him. He was 40 years old and built like a man who had spent his life in situations that required it, and he moved into the center of the space with the economy of someone who had done this before. Not the performance of readiness, but the reality of it. The weight settling into his hips and his hands coming up without ceremony or theater. She had told herself, preparing for tonight, that she could watch this. She had told herself it was a situation like the others, requiring what it required, demanding the particular steady attention she had developed for unbearable things. She had been partially right. She watched it. She did not look away. She owed him that. Not just her presence, but her full attention. The same unflinching attention she had given everything else in the past 36 hours. He had looked at her in a supply room when she was broken and had not looked away. The minimum she could do was return the equivalents. It was not brief. It was not clean. It was two men in a concrete room who both had a great deal to prove and a great deal at stake, and neither of whom was willing to simplify what the situation actually was by making it end quickly. Dragunov was strong and fast and had the particular ruthless efficiency of a man who had survived things that left marks. She could see the marks, the old damage in the way he moved, the compensations built into his body by years of requiring it to do difficult things. He hit Roman twice in the first minute with a force she felt in her own chest, and Roman took both and did not go down and did not make a sound. Roman was something different. He fought the way she had come to understand him, with a particular grinding patience, absorbing what he had to absorb and measuring and waiting for the moment that the calculation resolved. It was not beautiful. It was methodical and brutal, and it was costing him, visibly, the cost accumulating in his breathing and the set of his jaw and the way he moved his left shoulder after the fourth exchange. 7 minutes in, Dragunov reached into the space between his body and his waistband with the practiced subtlety of a man who had planned this and had simply been waiting for the moment to execute it. She saw it before anyone else did. She saw it because she had been watching him with the full, unflinching attention she had promised herself she would maintain, and she had been watching specifically for the moment when the calculation behind his pleasant now gone face resolved into action. She saw his hand move and she understood what the movement was, and she was already moving before the understanding had completed itself into a conscious thought. She crossed the space in 4 steps. Kalo shouted something behind her. The gun was coming up in Dragunov's hand. Small, dark, the specific terrible efficiency of a weapon being used by someone who had used weapons before. And she hit his arm with both of hers, the way her cousin had taught her, in a neighborhood where that knowledge felt like survival rather than violence, driving the barrel up and sideways with the momentum of her full weight behind it. The gun fired. The sound was enormous in the concrete space. The round went into the ceiling. Dragunov's arm came around toward her, the automatic response, the pivot, and then Roman was there. It was not a long conclusion. It was not complicated. Roman hit Dragunov twice, with the controlled finality of a man finishing a calculation he had been running for 8 minutes, and Dragunov went down and stayed down, and the room was very loud and then very quiet in the specific sequence those things always happen. Evelyn was on one knee on the concrete floor. Her hands were shaking. She noted this from a distance and found she didn't particularly care. Her ears were ringing from the shot, and the concrete was cold through her slacks, and the gun was somewhere to her left, having slid away when Dragunov fell. Roman crouched in front of her. His face was... She couldn't catalog it. The damage from the fight, the blood at his cheek and his split lower lip, and underneath all of it, that thing she had first seen in a supply room on a rainy Wednesday, the thing she had been seeing pieces of for 36 hours, and was only now seen whole. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was rough, not controlled, actually rough, with something in it that had nothing to do with strategy. "No," she said. "You?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, the involuntary release of something that had been held under enormous pressure for a very long time. I've been better, he said. She looked at his face, at the damage and beneath it, at the actual man, as opposed to every performance of the man, tired and hurting and looking at her the way she had not let herself look at him until she had no reason left not to. I know, she said. He held out his hand. She took it and stood. The room around them was doing what rooms do after catastrophic things. The motion of aftermath, men moving and talking, and the particular recalibration of a witnessed event settling into its permanent form. The old principal from before was speaking quietly with two others near the perimeter. Petrov had his phone out. Dragunov's ally was seated against the wall with the expression of a man who has watched the architecture of his plans become the evidence of his exposure. He would face what he faced. It would take time and it would be complicated, and Evelyn had given the documentation to Calloway that morning, and whatever came from that would come. She was not naive enough to believe that what happened in this room tonight solved every problem, or answered every question, or resolved every strand of a thing that had been building for 14 months. But Dragunov was down and his ally was exposed, and the 12 principals of Chicago's criminal landscape had witnessed both, and in the particular ecosystem that governed this city's underworld, what was witnessed was what was true, and what was true was what held. Danny was at the lakeshore property when she arrived at midnight. He was awake, which she had expected, sitting at the kitchen counter with a bowl of cereal he was not eating, looking out at the lake. He heard her come in and turned and looked at her face, the full, thorough look that went from her eyes to the rest of her and back, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me what happened." She sat down across from him at the counter. She was so tired that the room had a slightly unreal quality, the edges of things softer than they should have been. She told him. Not everything, not the years it would take to tell everything, but enough. The room below the Caldwell Tower. The gun. Roman. Danny listened with the expression he had when something was rearranging his understanding of the world. A particular stillness, his jaw set, his eyes doing the work of revision. When she finished, he said, "You could have been killed." "Yes." "You knew that going in." "Yes." He looked at her. "Why?" She thought about it. She thought about a supply room and a locked door and a question asked without inflection, and about 63 documents she had signed in good faith, and about a concrete floor and a hand extended to help her stand. "Because someone was worth it," she said, "and because I was done letting other people decide what I was worth." Danny looked at the bowl of cereal he wasn't eating. He was 20 years old and had blood dried at his hairline from a room where he had been zip-tied to a pipe and had tried not to look scared for a camera. And he was sitting in a 40th floor kitchen looking at his sister with an expression she recognized as the expression of someone who has just finished being the person who needed rescuing and is in the process of deciding who they're going to be instead. "I'm paying it back," he said. "The debt. Whatever Moretti covered. I'm paying it back." "Okay." "I mean it, Ev." "I know you do." She looked at him. "Start by going back to school." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, okay." She put her hand over his on the counter. They sat like that for a while, the two of them and the lake and the city lights reflecting off the water, and she let herself feel it. The full weight of the past 36 hours, the fear and the anger and the exhaustion, and underneath all of it, something that was not quite peace but was moving toward it, the way a storm moves off, and the sky goes a specific washed-out color that is its own kind of beautiful. Roman came to the lakeshore property at 2 in the morning. He knocked, which she had not expected. She had left the elevator unlocked, and he could have come up directly. And the knock was a small thing, a gesture toward the protocol of a life that was not the one they had been living for the past day and a half. She let him in. He had changed clothes and cleaned the damage from his face as much as it could be cleaned, which was partial. The bruising around his eye was fully committed now, deep purple and spreading, and the cut at his cheek had been closed with tape rather than stitches, which told her he had done it himself. He looked like a man in the aftermath of something enormous who had done the minimum required maintenance and considered that sufficient. He looked at her. She looked at him. The apartment was quiet. Danny had gone to bed an hour ago. "How is your shoulder?" she said. "Functional." "That's not what I asked." He almost smiled. "It hurts," he said. "I'll live." She got ice from the freezer, wrapped it in a dish towel, and held it out. He took it and pressed it against his shoulder with the slightly startled expression of a man who is not accustomed to being offered small practical cares. She filed that away with everything else she had been filing. He sat at the kitchen counter. She sat across from him. The city spread out through the windows behind her, and the lake was dark and vast, and the night was very quiet. The principals will formalize it in the next week, he said. Dragunov's organization surrenders the North Side claims, and the constructed documentation is formally discredited. The Holt connection goes to Calloway's office. What they do with it is their affair, but it's on record now, and it will move. He paused. Your name is clean, completely. The routing evidence makes it unambiguous. I know, she said. You can walk away from all of this, he said. From the job. From all of it. I want you to know that. Nothing that happened in the past 36 hours creates an obligation. She looked at him. Is that what you're offering me? The ability to walk away? He held her gaze. Something in his face was doing the thing it did in private. The layers moving at different speeds, the actual man arriving through the architecture of the man. I don't know what I'm offering, he said. I've never... He stopped. The stopped sentence hung in the air between them. I've run this organization for 15 years. I have made every decision alone because alone was the only way I knew how to make decisions without compromising anyone. I have been very good at that. He looked at the ice pack in his hand. And then you cried in a supply room, and I locked the door and asked a question. And now I'm sitting here at 2 a.m, not knowing how to make the next decision alone. She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen light, the city behind her. 36 hours of the most extreme and illuminating proximity she had ever experienced with another human being. I'm not walking away, she said. He looked up. I'm also not your secretary anymore, she said. I'm not your employee, and I'm not your liability, and I'm not the woman you protected. I'm the woman who was in it with you the whole way through, and that's a different thing. She held his gaze. If that's something you can live with, then I'm not going anywhere. He looked at her for a long, unhurried moment, the bruising around his eye, the cut at his cheek. Underneath all the damage, the thing she had been seeing pieces of since a rainy Wednesday in November, and was now seen whole and clear and without the interference of professional distance. Yeah, he said quietly. I can live with that. She reached across the counter and turned his hand over. The one with the old scar across the back, the one she had noticed on her first day and never asked about, and pressed her palm against it. He looked down at their hands, then up at her. They stayed like that for a while. The apartment was quiet, and the lake was dark, and the city moved through its hours with its customary indifference. And somewhere in it, Danny was sleeping, and somewhere in it, Dragunov was in custody, and somewhere in it, the documentation that bore her name was being correctly understood for what it was. And all of that was still true, and would still need to be managed, and would cost something in the days and weeks ahead. But right now it was 2 a.m, and the ice in the dish towel was melting, and Roman Moretti was sitting at a kitchen counter with his hand turned over under hers, looking at her with the expression of a man who has spent 15 years alone in decisions and has just, with considerable difficulty and cost, arrived at the first moment of not being. Months later, Chicago was a different city in no way that the city itself would acknowledge. Cities didn't notice the resolutions of things. The lake kept doing what the lake did. The traffic moved. The L rattled over the same tracks. But the West Side corridor was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 2 years. The North Side, claimed by Dragunov's organization, had been absorbed and redistributed through the formalized agreement of the principals, who had collectively decided, with the particular pragmatism of men who needed the city to be functional, that 14 months of manufactured conflict was expensive enough and the bill had been settled. Gerald Holt was indicted in February. His cooperation with the state attorney's office produced 3 additional indictments, none of which touched Roman Moretti in ways that the routing evidence didn't already immunize, and all of which moved through the system with the grinding institutional patience of legal processes that have been given solid foundations to stand on. Danny enrolled in the spring semester. He was studying finance, which made Evelyn feel several complicated things simultaneously. He called her every Sunday. He had not missed one. She was not Roman's secretary. She had been, briefly, nothing at all, a period of about 3 weeks in December when she had existed inside the strange suspended state of aftermath, doing the work of resolution without a title or a role. Then she and Roman had a conversation that lasted 4 hours and covered significant ground, and at the end of it, she had a different kind of position entirely. Not administrative, not subordinate, not defined by anyone else's organizational chart. The work she did was the work she was good at: financial architecture, operational analysis, the particular intelligence of someone who could look at a complex structure and find the place where it didn't hold. She was good at that. She had always been good at that. She had simply spent a long time in situations that required her to apply it to other people's interests. She applied it now to interests she had chosen. On a night in early spring, she stood on the rooftop terrace of the lakeshore property. The lake was doing something remarkable. The particular flat silver of early spring water, the way the city lights lay across it like something spilled. Roman stood beside her. He was not holding her hand. He was standing close enough that their arms touched, the specific warmth of that, and they were looking at the city and not talking, which was something they had gotten good at. The particular easy silence of two people who had been through something enormous together and no longer needed to fill the space between them with anything except their own presence. She thought about the supply room, the fluorescent buzz and the rain on the windows, and the cold floor, and the hands pressed over her mouth. She thought about how small she had been making herself, for how long, and how it had never actually worked, how she had been visible the whole time to the one person she had been certain didn't see her. She thought about 63 documents, about a reference number and a margin, about the seam in the texture of something that looked right but didn't hold. She thought about a locked door and a question asked without inflection. Roman turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. His face was his face, the gray at his temples, the healed cut at his cheek that had left a thin line she traced sometimes without thinking about it. The steel blue eyes that she had learned over many months were not a precision instrument deployed against the world, but a precision instrument deployed against the distance between himself and the things he wanted to let matter. He reached into his jacket pocket. He held out his hand. A ring, simple, specific, chosen with the care of a man who had learned, at considerable cost, that the right gesture is the one that means something rather than the one that looks like it should. She looked at it. She looked at him. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want to be straightforward about that." "I know you're not good at it," she said. "I'm going to get better." "I know that too." She held out her hand. He put the ring on her finger with the careful, deliberate attention of a man performing an action he intends never to have to reverse. His hands, which had done so many things she would never know the full inventory of, held hers with a gentleness that had nothing performed about it. She looked at the ring. She looked at the lake. She looked at him. The woman who had pressed her hands over her mouth in a dark room so no one would hear her had stopped being invisible. Not because someone had rescued her. She had been very specific with herself about that in the months of honest reckoning that followed everything. She had stopped being invisible because she had looked at the architecture of what was being done to her, and she had found the seam, and she had pulled it apart with her own hands, and that was something she had done, not something that had been done for her. Roman had locked a door and asked a question. That was the beginning. What came after was hers. She looked at the city spread out below them, still moving, still indifferent, still enormous and complicated and full of things that would need attention and cost and work. She leaned her shoulder against Roman's. He put his arm around her. The lake went on doing what the lake did. And that was enough. That was, in the end, exactly enough.